Whenever we talk Mississippi schools, the same question comes up every time. What happened to all that money we were supposed to get from casinos? And I found something kind of surprising when I looked into it. So gambling has always been a part of Mississippi culture, going back to even before Mississippi was a state. And in the early 20th century, backroom gambling along the coast was a significant revenue source. But in 1990, Mississippi went legit. We approved the Mississippi Gaming Control Act, legalizing casinos along the Gulf Coast and the Mississippi River. By 1992, the first legal casino had opened its doors. Called the Isle of Capri in Biloxi, it was named after that island that sunk in the Mississippi Sound. Natchez, Vicksburg, Tunica, they all followed very closely behind, bringing an economic boom to previously struggling towns. Money was pouring in, people were getting hired, it was going about as well as it could go. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Mississippi even went a step further, allowing casinos to finally be built over the land and not just over water. And in 2018, we became one of the very first states to legalize sports betting, which is kind of crazy considering that the whole gambling idea was initially met here with fiery protests and accusations of eternal damnation. But here's where it gets weird, because there's almost a Mandela effect on how the casinos were sold to Mississippi voters. If you ask just about anyone, they'll tell you that the reason that casinos were approved in Mississippi was because the revenue was supposed to go to our schools. The only thing is, none of that seems to have made it into the regulations. According to a Mississippi Today interview with Mississippi gaming head Larry Gregory, that whole idea of schools getting the lion's share of the revenue is a misconception. He says that no language resembling that made it into any of the regulations, the rules, the laws, the policies. Now, schools are still benefiting, but just not anywhere near the level that most people think they should. School districts near the casinos have seen a big boom in revenue, but not so much for the other school districts in the state. Schools like those in Biloxi and Tunica suddenly found that they had a lot more money to work with, but the other schools in the state found that they were having more trouble competing or offering competitive salaries for teachers. So how does the money break down? Well, casinos pay a 12% tax on their gaming revenue. 8% of that goes directly to the state and it gets put into our general fund. Now, some of that money in the general fund does go towards education, but it's split between things like infrastructure and healthcare. The remaining 4% of that 12% tax then goes to the local schools and local government where that casino is located. What's crazy is that most Mississippians are certain that this wasn't the future that was promised. Most believe that just like Florida and Missouri, the majority, if not all, of that gambling revenue was supposed to go to education. The thing is, the folks in charge of our budget have never really done a great job of making education a priority. In 2015, we passed a bill changing the way that the casino revenue was moved around. But even then, we didn't fix the problem. Instead, we just moved more money towards things like bonds and funding museums. Even when we got the lottery, we could have righted a wrong, creating a system like Louisiana's, where over a third of their lottery revenue goes to their schools. But again, we made infrastructure a priority over schools. Schools only see a piece of the action if the revenue goes over $80 million. So, what happened? Was Mississippi sold a bill of goods that was never delivered? Or is this really a Mandela effect, where we all perfectly remember something that never actually happened? I tend to think it's maybe a mix of both. Maybe there was a persistent rumor that was very convenient for getting that bill across the finish line. But it goes to show again that Mississippi state leaders and education dollars rarely mix well. And it's why I'm particularly nervous about the idea of the Department of Education going away and letting our state government sign blank checks.